Good evening, Miss Tolman. Good evening, Miss Stephanie Thompson. How are you, ladies?
Good, George. How are you?
I'm okay. You send me those inline messages and I don't have no idea how to respond. You're lucky I can do this.
That's quite all right, sir.
But I did not want to be rude and not respond,
Call
so
the
thank you.
Special meeting of the Sweetwater County Board of Trustees, Sweetwater District Number 1 to order. If you would please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm going to ask that people remain standing as we honor the more than 500,000 people who have lost their lives to COVID. The president has ordered the flags at half-staff, and this will be our way of remembering those who have lost the battle and their families and friends, some of whom have walked the halls of our very own schools. Thank you. Mrs. West, if we could have the roll call, please.
Mr. Nicholson?
Here.
Mr. Jackman?
Here.
Mrs. Thompson?
Here.
Mrs. Summers? Here. Mr. Batolo?
Here.
Mr. Reedy?
Here.
Chairman Jellicoe?
Here. I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda. It's been moved by Mr. Mickelson. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Jackman.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The motion passes. Okay, item number 3, I would entertain a motion to suspend the board meeting and open the public hearing. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, it's moved by Mrs. Summers. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Jackman. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion passes. So we are now in the public hearing. We have a presentation on in-town schools and Desert School Wamsutter start and end times and calendars for the 2021-2022 school year and the 2022-2023 school year. Mrs. Bolton.
Thank you, Chair Jellicoe, Superintendent McGovern, and members of the board. I'm here to present the start and end time calendar presentation for the 2021, 2022, and 2022, 2023 school years. The calendars in and of themselves are still the same, proposed to plans to be voted on. However, the start and end times, we were asked to adjust a few things to look at, and so that's really where I'm going to focus. I'll jump through the presentation just to go through and answer some questions if you guys have any, but remember we had the alternative task force that actually did the 4-day week. Then we had a start and end time task force that worked on these start and end times for the K-12 schools. And then we had the calendar committee that then used those start and end times in the 4-day week to develop 2 proposed calendars for the next 2 years. And really, I want to remind everyone that the goals of all of these committees were to provide professional development opportunities while limiting teacher time out of the classroom, to provide the blocks of uninterrupted collaboration time for all participants to attend and analyze data and plan, in turn to increase student achievement, and then recruit and retain quality teachers. With some of the challenges that you hear that come with teaching as time goes on, hopefully these can remedy some of those concerns. The end purpose is to increase student achievement. We have received so much feedback through all of these processes, and I feel like we've been as transparent as we can, putting it all out there. And honestly, having the internet and these internet surveys going out to businesses, to parents, to staff, to students has solicited a lot more feedback than we've ever received in the in-person public comment. And when I say we had over 1,000 comments almost every single time from parents, community members, and businesses on the surveys, like that's not an exaggeration. And the majority of them were parents that responded. Not so much the K-4 students responding. We got some 5-6, a little more 7-8, but the bulk of them were 9-12 students. And then the staff surveys. These were just the dates of the different committees. Last time I went over the student feedback and the options that they preferred. Option 2 of the 144 days seemed to be the preference for most. We did ask if they would be okay with the Friday. They did. This was the staff feedback. Again, option 2 with 144 days was the preferred. And then we broke out the staff responses. And the designated day off, majority was in favor of Friday, or supporting Friday, sorry. Then the parents, community, and business feedback, we had 1,430 responses, and the bulk of those were parents of current students. Again, the option 244 days was the preference. You can see that parents were the main contributors. I can't see that all the way from here. And the majority could support the Fridays off. These were the options that went out. Again, option 2 was the preferred by all parties, with elementary starting at 7:45 and in time 2:30, junior high 8:30, getting out at that can't be right. That's 157, sorry, the 144. The 2 options that ended up being presented was option 1, an early start time for elementary and a later start time for secondary. And then the other option that went out for the final feedback was an early start time for secondary, which was no earlier than 8 o'clock, and a later start time for elementary. Again, presenting Friday as the designated day off. The calendar committee, these are the dates they met. Again, sending this out for feedback. We asked about the 144 days, 147, and we asked if they could support those options or not. The yellow being yes, the blue no. That was students. The staff, again, same questions, and it was the 144-day option 2. And then the parents and community feedback, again, was the option 244 days. That was where I was, sorry, reading the wrong time, but it was the 7:45 start time for elementary and I think 8 for secondary. So that option 1 was the 7:45 elementary. High school kids and parents didn't like the late start or end time for high school. Getting out at 4:40 was too much, and elementary parents, I'm sorry, did not like the earlier start time of 7:45. They preferred option 2, 144, where elementary started later at 8:40 and got out at 3:20, and then the high school and junior high started at 8. That was the preferred option by all three groups. But then the conversation, we discussed why there were the gaps in time and why junior high kiddos would end up going the same amount of time as high school. And it was because we needed so much time between our buses. We're a larger community, so we can't start K-12 at the same time and still provide busing for everybody. But it was requested that we look at some different start times, therefore adjusting the end times a little bit based off of the feedback from the community. And then if that is the will of the group, the board to go with, then we figure out the busing from there. So that's really where I was gonna focus. Those were the 147, 151. This was the recommended time that went forward. And this is an additional option that the board requested. So when we sat down with the transportation director, Joe Klingenpill, and the assistant director, Rochelle Knezovich, and we discussed bus routes, and we were trying to brainstorm a bunch of different things. And we said, okay, let's just take the start times and put them based off the feedback, what parents and community and students were wanting. So we took junior high and high school starting at 8, and we took the elementary and started them at 8:10. This would allow the elementary kiddos to still be dropped off at 7:50 in the morning, so the parents would have time to drop them off and still get to work at 8 o'clock. This would have elementary ending at 3, the junior high ending at 3:45, and the high school ending at 4:15. So it's not that 4:40 end time that they weren't liking. So actually, after school times, we could offer all the same bus routes how they are, and I would think sometimes with parents usually getting off about 5, that's the time that the transportation is going to be needed the most in some of our discussions. But if we went with something like this, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but what it's going to make us do is get away from what we've always done. And we're going to have to look at bus routes and transportation for kids in the morning in a completely different light, because we will not be able to offer what we're offering right now. I'm not saying that's good, bad, or indifferent. That's just the reality of the situation. And we started to brainstorm and look at ways of registering for transportation. Do you truly need transportation? Being able to identify those kids that in order to get to school, like they have to have transportation, and making sure that they get it. So prioritizing those transportation needs. Except for some exclusive groups in the state of Wyoming, transportation is a privilege. It's not a right. It's only a right for certain groups. That's just a little piece of information. I know it's based off some feedback. The staff contract times or total hours are the same K-12. It's the instructional hours for kiddos that are different because of the minimum amount of time that we have to meet. But these are the times that got them more in the range that the board at least wanted as an option for the board to discuss. So the presentation is the same as last time. That's why I went through it and just jumped to this one so that the board can have the floor for the rest of the time to ask questions. Joe Klingenpill is here, our Director of Transportation, to answer any of the transportation questions for you guys. And of course, Kelly and I are here to answer any questions you guys have as you discuss this as well.
Questions? Mr. Mickelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Given our discussion at our last board meeting, what happens to elementary transportation if we find ourselves in a place where we have to close the school? how would that impact the busing with this schedule?
So if we are in the position that we end up having to close a school or 5, I mean, that's the reality of where they're suggesting cuts. We would have to rezone all of the schools again and reboundary all the schools, which would naturally change all of the transportation. But Joe, go ahead and jump in on that.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Superintendent McGovern. If we had to close a school, obviously those buses could be redirected to other schools. However, you're going to have more students in the schools, so you're going to have more students on the buses also. So I don't know if that would actually give us more buses overall to be able to transport the kids to school and then follow up with the high school and the junior high. The issue with our routes, and most of them are elementary, that's the largest number. We have in the range of 90 routes. We have 54 drivers. So they obviously do tiered routes. So most of the drivers do more than one route. And that's expected from the state per Chapter 20 rules. So if we have the high school and junior high starting at the same, we couldn't have the high school, junior high, elementary all starting at the same time. So like 8:10, 8:08, that's essentially starting at the same time. We would have to have 90 drivers to be able to do that. So you have to figure, if you did junior high and high school at the same time, I mean, I'm not going to say that that would work out perfectly, but I will say that that would be easier to be able to direct those elementary buses to the junior high and the high school to be able to cover those routes. And then in the afternoons, with the dismissal times being different, then that helps also. There was one thing I wanted to mention. Some people were suggesting 20-minute route times. They say, look, you've got most of your routes take 20 minutes. Well, that's the drive time of the routes. That doesn't count the 10 to 15 minutes it takes to load the kids, and then your 20 minutes of driving to get the kids home, and then another, because you may be in the north part of town and have to go to the high school. So that's another 15 to 20 minutes. So you're actually looking at a 40-minute to 45-minute overall drive time on those routes. So it's kind of a misconception when you say, look, this route, so they only take 20 minutes. The drive time is 20 minutes from stop one to stop the last stop. It's not a total drive time. Total drive time is probably 40 minutes for those routes. Some of them can be, if they're done in 10, that'd take us 20 minutes, but there aren't many of those. So.
Other questions?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Batolo?
as you looked at this recommendation for an 8:40 start time at elementary, are there things that we can plan into that time that if a parent has to drop a kid off before they go to work? I know that's a problem because you don't want kids out on the playground, but is that something we can manage? Because it sounds to me like we're probably not going to be able to manage the buses, especially if things get more complex than they are now.
So thank you, Mr. Batolo. Those are both, I mean, that's a really good question. Of course, we can offer stuff before and after school, but it won't be to the whole school. So, it'll be either to selective groups of maybe some intervention. I know sometimes there's some extra activities going on. The school district doesn't currently offer daycares or things like that. So we could, I don't ever want to say we can't. I don't know that that would eliminate that for all parents. I do think one thing when we're looking at the start and end times, what this is going to come down to is doing what's best for kids, which I know is a priority for you guys. And it's going to be weighing which over the other, because if you build the schedule around bus routes, maybe that schedule is not best for kids, but we're able to offer the same transportation. Or you don't build the schedule around bus routes and that schedule is what's best for kids, but then we're having to rethink how we do transportation, which that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's going to be the lesser of two evils. And I think when people are requesting, like, this isn't good for kids, we want this, we want this, we want this, something else gives when we're going to give that. It's not that the requests aren't valid or needed, it's just going to be that discussion that you guys are going to have of what is better for kids. Is it building the schedule around the buses and letting the buses lead the schedule, or building the schedule and then figuring out the buses, is kind of what I heard. So I don't think it's going to be a win. There's no way it's going to be a win-win. It's going to be a give or take, either one you go with.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that also. One of the things that irritates me to hear is, well, that's always the way we've done it. And Nicole's absolutely right. This is an opportunity for us to look at a different way of doing things and a better way of doing things. Times change, so we need to change along with them. One of the things I would like to do that would be very important for our functioning and to be as efficient as possible is bus registration. People have to register to ride the bus. And then we're looking at some bus routing software to save time, and we may be able to save a bus, 2-3 buses here or there just using the routing software. Not the end all beat all. We might have to take a look at it when it's done, but it's a lot easier and quicker and more efficient to load all that information in an algorithm and come up with our bus routes. So I'm actually looking forward to trying to do things a little differently and be as efficient as we possibly can and give every kid a seat on that bus. And we'll see if it's possible, but we'll do everything we can to try and make sure it works.
Other questions?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Summers?
currently, what is your highest demand? Is it before school or is it after school for busing?
Usually it's before school because everybody's riding at the same time. After school, you got kids staying after, so we have activities buses that show up after the other routes are done. So our highest demand, the biggest strain is in the mornings with the number of students that we have on the buses.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
The one thing I have found interesting, though, I think the way that we have it now, and Rochelle is amazing at building these routes, but she's even noticed a lot of the inefficiencies that are coming on this because of just the way we've always done it. I think one thing that's interesting, if you guys look around town in the morning at bus stops, because one of the bus stops is right by my house, 3 times for the high school, the junior high, not junior high, sorry, Sage and then Pilot Butte. But the amount of parents that drive their kids to the bus stop and just wait in the car, and then when the bus arrives, they let the kids out to catch the bus that's then at the school in 5 minutes. So, and good for them for doing that. My point in getting to that is I really question how many kids are riding the bus that don't absolutely need to just because it's offered and it's a luxury, versus how many kids truly need to ride the bus in the morning. And so I don't know that we have a good handle on that, because when I drive around in the morning going to schools and the bus routes, I can't believe the amount of cars that are just parked there waiting for the bus to come. And I'm thinking, it's just 5 minutes. You could drop them off yourself. And so I don't know if it's just because it's a luxury and it's there, so they get on, and great. I mean, if it's there, but I don't know if we can really truly assess what that need is right now in the morning, because and Rochelle and Joe identified a bunch of those inefficiencies already. So I think that's where they're getting excited, no matter what happens, to look at some stuff different. So I think in some ways it's hard to answer that.
Yeah, Rochelle is really good at that. That's why when this bus routing software, so when I was talking about, we'll take a look at it, make tweaks. Rochelle will be able to take a look at that and go, no, yeah, this, and she does it quickly, efficiently. But I don't want her to start from scratch. I want to be able to put it in there and then tweak it as she needs to. And she is absolutely fantastic at that. I don't know how she does it, but she does.
Mr. Jackman?
Joe, didn't UPS put out something that they were allowing school districts to use their routing software they use for package delivery?
Well, I don't know. I haven't heard about that yet, but when I was looking, I just started today looking at the routing software.
Mhm.
Routing's a little bit different just for a commercial thing than buses, but I will look into it and see, because bus routing is a little different than commercial routing as far as the packages and stuff. But if they have something, I'll certainly take a look at it. I'm looking at everything, whatever works best.
Doesn't the state have some programs too that they recommend?
I don't know if they have anything that they recommend or
Or
not.
just, maybe some of the school districts are utilizing some of them and
Yeah.
so that might.
And what I was planning on doing, I'm going to put out an email to all the directors
Okay.
and see, hey, if you use bus routing software, what is it that you use and how do you like it? We had some routing software about 5 years ago that we were using, but it didn't work very well. But 5 years is, 500 years in
Eternity.
computer time. There's all kinds of new stuff out there. So
Any other questions?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jackman?
wasn't there legislation talking about like the bubbles for schools extending the busing areas this year? I thought I remember something about that, but
yeah,
Superintendent McGovern?
Sure. Thank you, Mrs. Jellicoe. What they did with Chapter 20 rules was they changed the no transportation zone from 1 mile for elementary K through 6, and then secondary was 2 miles for 7 through 12. It previously was 1 mile for elementary, 1.5 for junior high, and 2 for the high school. But those rules were revised, and that's where they came up with the 1 mile and the 2 mile.
Any other
Which-
questions? My recollection,
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Thompson.
sorry to interrupt.
Mrs. Thompson, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Mr. Cleaningpeel, I just have a couple of questions and then some comments as well. So this year, I was one of the parents who tried to help the district out by driving my kids to school as asked at the beginning of the year to help keep the population on the buses down due to the COVID. I quickly found out that although I could drop my kids off at Overland and East Side in the morning just fine, getting there in the afternoon was impossible. And so one of my kids wound up sitting outside waiting for me every day. So I know that other parents have the same problem. And so just for example, for our solution was one of my children rides the bus and the other one does not, just so I can pick one of them up and make it home in time to meet the bus for the other child. With that in mind, did we see a big decrease when we asked parents to do that? And are we still seeing that decrease?
it wasn't a huge decrease, no. And a lot of our buses are right at capacity. Some of them not so much, but I didn't see a big decrease in that, no.
Other questions?
On the one schedule, the newest one, we would be able to run as many routes as we are now at the end of the day. It would just be the morning that would have to be adjusted.
The alternative option that we requested cuts that number of hours down to 1,056, which is closer to the 1,050 that they're required by state law to have. My question is, could something like the additional option for the junior high be inserted into one of these others so that that hour difference is closer? Am I making sense? For example, taking that additional option at board request for the junior high and inserting it in the 21-22 timeframe. Its start times are the same. It would be the end times that would be different, that would get the hours down to 10:56 instead of the 11:04.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely could do that. It would just have us looking at busing different for after school for that. It's no different than the additional option that's being proposed. The one concern, these schedules were built around the busing. And so if the earliest we could go for junior high and high school was 8 o'clock, and I needed at least 40 minutes in the morning. That's why elementary started at 8:40. And we've done that in the past and they didn't love it. And so I knew it was a catch-22, either one. I knew that high school was voting to get out as early as they possibly could, and elementary was gonna vote to start as late as they could, but please don't start them that late, or don't start them this early. And so to answer your question, Ms. Jellicoe, we absolutely can. I am worried about the elementary 8:40 start time just because of parents going to work. That in the past has caused lots of complaints, and that was the biggest compliment when the board redid the start and end times last time, was moving it so they could drop them off beforehand.
And yet that's the recommendation though, isn't it?
And that's because these schedules were, no, well, yes, on the old one, that's because these schedules were built around making sure we had at least 40 minutes with the busing.
Okay.
And so then the other option was to start at 7:45, but they did not love the late for high school.
So I would assume that you would not have given us a schedule that we don't think is possible to work out. So that the additional option that we requested is workable in your mind.
Well, the four of us sat down and brainstormed as much as we could based off of that. And it's workable with the understanding that the morning transportation is going to look very different, and some may not be offered transportation. We're going to have to blow up everything we've ever known about transportation and start from scratch, which I don't mean to sound negative, because that could be a good thing. We've been doing the same thing for how many years? And I know Joe and Rochelle got excited about some options, but we have to be, I want the board to make sure you're fully informed that if it's doable at the expense of some transportation.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jackman.
I got a couple questions. Joe, how many junior high bus routes do you have?
I think we have like 18.
And I'm leading into
18,
this.
about 21. That includes the special needs routes, but 18, I think, without.
I'm leading into this thinking, what if on that additional option, the junior high went 8:40 to 4:25? And so the junior high would have its own start time. You get 20 bus routes. That helps you in the morning quite a bit. We alleviate the problem of the extra hours in the days. They're exiting about the same time as the high school. It's close enough to be considered the same time. The kids are starting later. The junior high is probably when it's most key for those kids to sleep in. Just a thought or a guess.
We can look at any times.
Yeah.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mickelson?
thank you. So I have a couple of thoughts. One being, when we sent this all out for feedback from the community, those late outs for secondary students were something that was very much not desired. I think in an ideal world, our secondary schools wouldn't start before 9 o'clock, right? But that is not something that we're in a place to make happen. And then my big concern with that late elementary start time comes not so much from the families who have the luxury of waiting in the car for the bus, and more, we had these neighbors, I don't know, back before we moved elementary up early. And there was a 5th grader and a 3rd grader. And the parents both worked shift work and were gone at 6 in the morning. And so they were close enough, they weren't bused, and they walked to school. And what that meant, because the 5-6 start time was different enough from that late elementary, is that 3rd grader was on his own, home alone, right? So we're forcing parents who don't have the means to make accommodations into leaving their child unsupervised, into violating the law, because they don't have a way to ensure that that kid who really needs to be on the bus is at school supervised by adults, because they're, working 2 and 3 jobs just to make sure that there's food on the table. And so I have a lot of reservations about that late elementary start time. for the kids who are already in a disadvantaged position. And so I like this option. It starts 5 minutes earlier, right, than our current option, which gives parents who work 8 to 5 more time to get their kids to school. Gives us more time to coordinate drop-off times so that schools can say, hey, if you're dropping your kid off, Group A does 7:50, Group B does 7:55, groups, so that they can coordinate that traffic flow. In respects the very strong preference for those secondary kids to not get out so late, pushing their practices and other things down. And so I really appreciate the work that went into this additional option. It resolves the concerns about the junior high total yearly hours and the length of those kids' days. It gets the high school kids out early enough that they're not pushing their practices more than an hour down. And it gives us a lot of room in those K-6 buildings to provide interventions to kids who are behind and need that extra support without an additional cost, because we already have people there on contract time. And the only real drawback I can see from this is the difficulty in providing the busing. But I really like the idea of registration and letting parents know, we need you to sign up for this. We have to plan around this. If you absolutely, can't get your kid to school and you don't get on the bus, then you need to contact us and we'll work through it. I think that is a really resolvable issue that works for all of the many needs that the kids have, and still makes an adjustment that hopefully we'll see some benefit for those secondary kids where it's not so early and they get, even a half an hour extra to allow their brains to kick in. And I think it is a far less complex solution than moving to a system where we're on like a 12-day rotating schedule where Monday math is at 7:30 and Tuesday it's at 8:30 and Wednesday it's at 2:30 and Thursday it's at 11:30, because that is, there are districts that do that to spread that effect around. But that's really complex, especially when you throw in all of the work that we've done to develop our relationship with the community college. It becomes almost impossible to make that work. And so I really see this as a very strong and positive way to make this change without making anybody's day overly long. So thank you.
Other questions? I'm trying to think, when did this additional option, when was it posted for people to see? Would that have been last Thursday or last Tuesday?
Last Tuesday.
Last Tuesday?
Mhm.
So it's been
We
almost a
got it-
week,
Yeah, we got
Oh,
it
yeah.
done.
almost
right
a week.
away.
It was
Mhm.
with the agenda.
With the
Carol.
agenda, okay. I'm curious if there's any public comments specifically about that option as opposed to the other options that have been out longer.
I
So,
didn't.
and
still-
we'll get to the
yeah.
public comment here in a
I'm
moment.
still
So,
hearing stuff about a lot of the other options that aren't being proposed.
that aren't
and
even being
so,
proposed, so,
yeah.
okay. Other questions? Anyone? Well, then I will, let's start with the public comment regarding the start and end times and the calendars. Ryan Bowler, who is a staff member, his comment, the current start and end times are entirely inequitable between elementary and secondary schools. Both start and end times say that employees are working the same number of hours per day. However, the schedule does not require elementary school teachers to work on Fridays. This results in a difference of 334 hours of work between the elementary school teachers and the secondary school teachers. As teachers are paid the same for equal number of years of experience, regardless whether they are teaching in the elementary school or a secondary school, it is making the wages considerably inequitable. A difference of 334 hours out of 1,448 hours per year is a reduction of work by 23%. This means that elementary school teachers are required to work 23% less than their peers in the secondary schools, but receive the same compensation. Neither of these options is equitable for both groups of people, and neither option should be selected. The calendar and scheduling committee should reconvene and develop a plan that is equitable for both groups of employees. Jessica Medler, who is a parent, I have more of a question regarding start and end times. Will the administration consider publications, studies, and findings that show later start times after 8 a.m. for adolescents, 7th through 12th grade, is more beneficial for them to be successful academically, mentally, and physically? Are they just considering input from parents or weighing their decision more on parents who are more concerned about before and after school childcare for young students, K through 6th, in determining start and end times? Thank you. I would like to say in answer to that question is that's why we went with an 8 o'clock start time, is to start acknowledging that research that shows that adolescents do better when they start later. It's not the 8:30 that many places regard as the baseline, but I believe it's a step in the right direction as we're moving away from the earlier start times that we've been using and trying to work towards. The 8 o'clock time was working towards it, so it was a compromise with the community and the district in terms of trying to get some additional rest time for adolescents. So that's exactly what the discussion about start times is about. Superintendent, did you want to add anything to that?
No, that's perfect.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Mira Suray, who also is a parent. All the start and end times that I've seen do not make sense to me. I will not encourage late start in high school. Those older kids are so close to entering college life and adulthood and should be encouraged in being responsible and used to waking up early and ready for duty. The whole concept of a 4-day week will be creating so much issues for parents, like finding childcare. Have the board considered the repercussions in our community, the families, well-being, and our local economy? Many parents, as myself, voiced their concern many times, but the decision was made in the chaos of a pandemic when many of us were left out because our priorities were elsewhere. I have not seen any parent that approves of this 4-day week, and I wish that more parents will come together to petition against this 4-day week. Thank you. Lacey Vasquez, student. I like how we are going to the 4-day week. However, having the end time at 4 is a bit late. Sport practices wouldn't get over till pretty late, and this also interferes with kids' work schedules, since most of the time kids go to work at or around 4. Kristen Ryan, a parent. Taking off Fridays will already have a significant impact on our community. Having the elementary not start until well after 8 a.m. and secondary be released after elementary is going to devastate families that are already struggling to make ends meet. Many parents depend on older children to help out. Making the proposed changes is going to force people to quit their jobs or pay for extra childcare they cannot afford. Families' only other choice will be to have older children pulled from the district and be homeschooled so that they can be home to help. The district is trying to make too many changes too quickly. I really hope that the board will consider the devastating effects the time changes will have on our community. Nancy Bowers, a parent. The additional board option schedule of 8 o'clock and 8:10 start times is the best option by far. Danielle Schumacher, a parent and a community member. I would like to begin by summarizing why it felt it was necessary to make this comment. In all the research I have conducted, I have not reviewed a single study or article indicating that moving back the start time for the secondary level meant moving the start time earlier for the elementary and middle school level. So my focus and concern is on the earlier start time for the students K-6th grade. By moving this time up, we are looking at starting a school day well before 7 a.m. for many of those students. It is common misconception all young children are just up earlier than 7 a.m. and therefore there is no impact. Or the misconception that because they are littler and their bedtime can be controlled by moving it up will have no impact on these younger children. In fact, the research I intend on introducing to the board this evening shows how an earlier start to the day means less sleep for these students. And less sleep in return means sleep-deprived children with direct consequence on their academic performance and achievement, and behavioral problems impacting their everyday learning, along with everyone within their classroom, students and staff. Further, later start times correlate with higher scores in all, emphasis added, school-age children. And sunlight itself also impacts our younger school-age children, correlating with higher scores as well. Hence, I intend on presenting why it is so important to make sure our children's best interests is considered by not moving up the school start time for K through 6th grade. First, I would like to address the comments made at the board meeting during the public meeting regarding the school calendars on the 8th day of February 2021. First and foremost, the one thing that struck out to me the most was a comment from Trustee Mickelson, who stated that the board's decision needed to be made on what is best for the students, not preference of the parents, staff, and community. Although I understand the children are the utmost importance regarding these decisions, I do strongly disagree the parents, staff, and the community do not need to have a voice in this decision-making. Up to this point, parents, staff, and community have been included in polls which were shown by Mrs. Bolton during her presentation. I do not believe the presentation was clear on all the data to be presented to this board, and instead showed numbers of preferences by those already mentioned. It is my position the inclusion of staff, parents, and the community is absolutely vital for our school district. We, the parents, staff, and community, voted for all those members of the board with the idea you would not only continue to put our children first, but you would also work with all of us to make the school district stronger and better than before. As it has been mentioned, the school district is the largest employer in Sweetwater County. So without parent, staff, and community support, it is naive to think excluding the data presented from staff, parents, and the community does not impact our children's best interest within our school district. It is our community, our parents, or our staff who support each and every school within Sweetwater County School District Number 1. That support includes your staff members, the administration, and those who are currently serving on the board as elected board members. So the idea that their preference should not be considered will only strain that relationship more, which in return impacts each and every student within our district. As a domino effect, it also impacts our staff, especially teachers, when that relationship is strained. And that also affects the administration. So overall, the parents, staff, and community's opinion and preference does need to be strongly considered when discussing what to do regarding start and end times for our children, who again are the utmost important aspect here. Second, I want to address the concern regarding being in the dark for bus stops. Trustee Mickelson again indicated the idea of kids being in the dark for bus stop already happens and should be disregarded. Although I do agree, children are already in the dark for bus stops. I would like to point out there is a huge difference in the age of those students in the dark right now. The older kids who catch the bus earlier now are in the dark, and it is unfortunate they have to catch the bus so early. But the majority of these individuals are older, no longer scared of the dark, and able to stand at the stop without issue. To think a bus stop could potentially be moved for a 5-year-old or even a 9-year-old to being in the complete dark by having school start earlier than it already does for this age group is honestly absurd. Moreover, for those students who are walking to school, they may then have to walk in the dark depending on when campus opens based on an earlier start time or simply the time of year. Again, little kids aged between 5 and 12. When looking at the idea of our children going to school in the dark, there are some areas of Sweetwater County that it is inevitable, such as Superior. However, that does not have to be the case district-wide. And this does not need to be considered and not just disregarded, as research shows sunshine correlates with higher test scores. In fact, an article, Rise and Shine, How School Start Times Affect Academic Performance, by Jennifer Heisel and Samuel Norris on www.educationnext.org, Rise, Shine, How Start Times Affect Academic Performance, discuss the study and comparing test scores between schools that start in accordance to having sunlight available, resulting in students between 8 years old and 15 years old, with an hour delay in start times due to the time of sunrise, showed an increase in math scores between 1 to 8% of a standard deviation for all adolescents. This held true for reading scores as well, but with increase of 6% of all adolescents, this increase in scores was related to the sunlight hitting the outside of the eyelids of these students, suppressing production of hormone melatonin, excuse me, and stimulating the brain processes to increase alertness. Hence, more sunlight before school may improve cognitive function by increasing sleep levels and alertness, and directly impacting an increase in academic achievement for children of all ages. Mr. Mickelson, would you pick up there, please? Excuse me.
Third, there were concerns with the day that continued to be later in the afternoon would take away opportunity for enrichment programs after school. It is unclear why getting out at 3:20 affects that, but if that truly were an issue and is a mere suggestion, two concerns brought by Mrs. Bolton and Trustee Mickelson could be resolved. Mrs. Bolton's concern of having the children dropped off too early by those parents getting to work at 8 a.m. and Trustee Mickelson's concerns of losing potential enrichment programs is addressed by having these programs placed at the beginning of the school day. If the school offered enrichment programs beginning at 8 a.m., parents could still drop off their children before school started without issues of being unsupervised and without losing the opportunity to offer these programs to those students. A 30-minute enrichment program could benefit all the students and allow for both issues to be addressed. Either way, the idea that the few students who end up being on the school premises early, even when considering 10 to 20 students out of a student body of 200 to 300 students, should be handled appropriately instead of being considered as a reason to move times up. However, that is a mere suggestion, so I would rather focus on the research. An article on educational leadership, giving students the right time of day, found at www.ascd.org/publications/educational-leadership/December 97/volume 55/number 04/giving students the right time of day.aspx stated research has found general efficiency of thinking and general functioning is at its lowest ebb in the early morning hours, and it is at its highest at about 4 p.m. when it begins to decline. Research further found school children taught at about 3 p.m. retained material longer than those taught in the morning. So those students who read a story in the afternoon could recall more details than students who read at 9 in the morning. Hence, starting school later in the morning and going into the mid-afternoon before 4 p.m. is the most ideal situation, and even allows a later start time with enrichment programs in the later afternoon, if not moved to an earlier time in the day. Ultimately, I do not believe that children's best interests do need to be considered and held to a high regard when making a final decision involving the start and end times of all the students, which is why I asked the board when making this decision to rely on the research regarding earlier start times, sleep deprivation, and circadian rhythms, but also take into consideration the parent, staff, and community preferences that were expressed. When looking at research, it is education experts who suggest starting classes later in the morning to help students feel less tired, more alert, resulting in better academic achievement. And this suggestion is for all ages, emphasis added, of students. To assist with having this knowledge, I would like to point out the key facts that need to be considered when reviewing research for all ages of students. 1. When looking at sleep, the sleepfoundation.org published an article, School and Sleep, stating that students 13 years old and younger need 9 to 11 hours of sleeping. This means children need to be asleep and in the process of the various stages of sleep for 9 to 11 hours. As previously indicated in my prior comment, this does not mean simply moving a bedtime for these younger children, and instead actually allowing their bodies to fall asleep and hit the proper stages of REM while sleeping for a full 9 to 11 hours. 2. This amount of sleep for this age group is reiterated and consistent with the American Academy of Pediatrics endorsement through the American Academy Sleep Medicine recommendation stating that children ages 6 to 12 actually need 9 to 12 hours of sleep. Again, actual sleep where their bodies are not just laying in bed in an earlier time. The article, Consensus Statement of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine on the Recommended Amount of Sleep for Healthy Children, Methodology and Discussion, found on ncbi.nim.nih.gov, breaks down research showing how much sleep children need and the risks that occur when not receiving the amount of sleep necessary for these children aged 6 to 12 years of age. This article, research is broken down as follows. 3A, children 6 to 12 years of age need 9 to 12 hours of sleep for 24 hours on a regular basis. Based off of data received from 20 countries, 9 to 12-year-olds slept approximately 10 hours, which in turn reported better health overall for those children, where more than 9 hours of sleep meant better emotional liability and less restless, impulsive behaviors. 3BI. Further, the study showed shorter sleep duration was associated with higher risk of or actual hypertension. 3BII. Most importantly, a mean of 9.3 hours of sleep significantly meant positive effects on scores and emotional regulation. 3C. When looking at children specifically at 7 to 8 years old with less than 7.7 hours of sleep, they have high impulsivity scores. 3D, when looking at school-age children, 3DI, at least 10 hours of sleep report less health complaints, where less than 8 hours of sleep increase the reports of ADHD behaviors, and 9 hours is necessary for adequate behavioral functioning. 3DII, students who had 6.5 hours of sleep increased the teacher-reported academic difficulties and attentional problems. 3DIII, and most importantly, the sleep directly impacts how these students perform. 3DIIIA, 9.2 hours of sleep extended by 30 minutes improved students' alertness, where decreasing by 30 minutes proved the opposite. Same B, 8.1 hours of sleep extended by an hour improved cognitive performance. 3DIIIA, 8.8 hours of sleep with a 4-day restriction to only 8 hours of sleep impaired the students' memories and attention when compared to extending that sleep to 9.3 hours. 3D4, short sleep duration or less than the median I have just discussed resulted in daytime tiredness. 3D5, 10 years old to 19 years old students with 1 less hour of optimum sleep resulted in lower academic achievement scores. 3D6, 4 years old to 10 years old students with shorter sleep duration of less than 11 hours was negatively associated with receptive vocabulary. 3D7, longer sleep duration was associated with better cognitive performance, where shorter sleep duration was linked to attention problems, restless impulsive behavior, and deterioration in vigilance. 3D8, students who started school 20 minutes later reported less tiredness, emphasis added. 4, by sleeping the recommended amount of time, the outcomes were better overall for 4A, improved attention, 4B, behavior, 4C, learning, 4D, memory, 4E, emotional regulation, 4F, quality of life, 4G, mental and physical health. 5, by regularly sleeping fewer than the recommended hours had poor outcomes overall for 5A, attention, behavior, and learning problems. 5B, this included the increased risks of accidents, injuries, hypertension, obesity, diabetes, and depression. 6, the crux of this article that this board ultimately needs to consider is that healthy sleep means 6A, adequate duration, 6B, appropriate timing, 6C, good quality, 6D, regularity, 6E, absence of disturbances and disorders. The sleepfoundation.org also had 2 articles, Children in Sleep and Improve Your Child's School Performance with a Good Night's Sleep, both emphasizing the importance of sleep and the direct impacts on children. An earlier start time means children not getting as much sleep as they need, where sleep is a crucial role in the development of young minds, including the direct impact of happiness, alertness and attention, cognitive performance, mood, residency, vocabulary acquisition, and learning and memory. Upon children not having enough sleep, they are grumpy and hyperactive, showing symptoms of ADHD. Being sleepy impacts the ability of children to pay attention, which is a ramification for school performance. But further, the research shows that the best time to put a child to bed is when they are asleep, so they get a full night's sleep. Because when a child is overtired, they actually have a hard time falling asleep, meaning less sleep throughout the night, which in return impacts their next day at school. The research in these articles shows that in order to have a child thrive at school, they need energy, the ability to focus, concentrate, retain information, and be creative problem solvers. But this is not possible when their sleep is impacted by earlier start times. Signs of sleepiness turns to behavioral and learning difficulties because they lack the ability to concentrate and have poor moods. An earlier start time impacting at least getting 10 hours of sleep resulted in teacher reporting kids having more academic problems and attentions problems. One of the predicators for school failures is when children are fatigued or are difficult to arouse in the morning. And opposite of that, higher grades showed significantly more sleep. Finally, as the CDC has pointed out in an article heavily relied upon by this board, the circadian rhythm must be taken into consideration. One thing to note is there are approximately 100 different types of circadian rhythms. Further, not all kids are the same. So although younger kids are thought to go to bed earlier or wake up earlier, and it is simple to start school earlier, this is not always true. Research shows puberty is the determining factor for the change in the circadian rhythm, where children's bodies begin to go off of biology instead of times of the day. On average, this is as early as 11 for girls and 13 for boys. Hence, 5th and 6th grades are directly impacted by earlier start times. Further, not all kids are the same, and researches shows kids even younger than 11 can have a similar circadian rhythm as teenagers, making them night owls, and in return, their biological clock does not condone an earlier start time, very similar to teenagers. Overall, the purpose of this comment is to ask the board to truly consider what is in our children's best interest, while also considering the staff, parents, and community. Please consider the direct impacts an earlier start time has on those children getting on the bus in the dark, those children who have a circadian rhythm similar to teenagers, and most importantly, the direct impacts an earlier start time will have on the sleep of these students, directly impacting their behaviors and academic achievement when deciding on a start and end time, particularly regarding the younger students. All considerations backed by research and many different studies conducted, and all supported by the American Academy of Pediatrics and American Academy of Sleep Medicine. Finally, by reviewing all provided, I ask this board to strongly consider our children's best interest by having a later start time for the students between K through 6th grade.
That concludes the public comment for the public meeting. Are there any other comments or questions by the trustees at this time? Mr. Mickelson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to provide a clarification. Well, first, I wanted to remind folks out there, you're always welcome to call me at 389-9169, text, whatever you'd like to get a hold of me, or you can email me at Mickelson M, so MICKELSON M like Mike, at swo1.k12.wi.us. And I'm always happy to discuss where I've reached my thoughts on things, and certainly welcome that feedback. I was not as articulate as I would have liked to have been when I made the comments about feeling that it is, in this case, necessary for us to make a decision that is in the best interests of the students rather than the community. If I really felt that way, our high school and junior high would start at 9, our 5-6 would start at 8:30, and our elementary schools would start earlier. That's what I think would be absolutely in the best interest of those students. I'm looking to find a path through that does respect the wishes of the students, of the parents, of the district needs, of the teachers, in a way that does move us forward towards a more research-based practice for our start and end times. And so I apologize for stating it so crudely at the last meeting, and I hope that I provided some clarity. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions by the trustees?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Batolo?
that first comment that was made about the times that teachers are actually in schools, is there confusion on that? Or can we talk about that for a second? Because it seems to me like they're there for 8 hours and 45 minutes also every day.
Yes, thank you, Chair Jellicoe.
Mrs. Bolton?
Thank you, Mr. Batolo. I don't know. I was trying to figure out where that was, I don't know where they got that. I was thinking maybe the actual yearly hours or instructional hours, or the instructional day maybe got confused with that. But that upper part is the instructional hours, and then the lower part actually shows the staff contract hours. And so all staff would work 8 hours and 45 minutes a day. And then it just shows how many, on the 4-day week, how many hours they work, how many hours they would work on the 5-day week that the staff work, how many PD days there's going to be, and then their total number of yearly hours versus their current contracts. So there's no discrepancy. Thank you.
And I wondered if maybe the way that was presented, 35 on a 4-day week,
Mhm.
led them to believe that they're not working on Fridays. So
That might have been,
Okay.
yeah.
thank you.
And I would like to clarify, if the legislature passes legislation that would actually cut the number of professional development days from 10 to 5, how will that impact these schedules, these calendars?
Well, we would have to cut out 5 somewhere. I mean, our calendar, I've pondered that because our calendar is no longer going to be a traditional calendar where you get the 10 days.
My
And
point.
yeah, so the people that are on the 10 days, I don't know how they're going to do it with parent-teacher conferences and giving teachers any time to get ready. I don't know how that's even possible. With ours, we'll have all kinds of flexibility actually, because we have far beyond 10. So I hope they don't do that, but if they do, it would be teacher days. It wouldn't affect the student days.
Okay. I just wanted that clarification.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Mrs. Jellicoe.
Superintendent McGovern?
Trustees, as you know, just for clarification though, in legislation that recommends to do those things, from taking professional development days from 10 down to 5, the result of some of those is going to be a decrease in salaries for teachers. Those are the unintended consequence of those kind of actions. And so that brings up the other topic of school funding and the legislative cuts and the proposals that are out there. But I think it's important for our community to understand that by reducing those hours in legislation and such would have in outside, not these calendars here, these would be alternative calendars approved by our board and hopefully approved by the state board. The legislation in the bills, if that passed, would unintentionally be reduced salaries. That's really where that is going, and that is not good for our district.
And if my recollection serves me, it's about a 2.8% cut to salaries based on the 5 days, going to a 5-day professional development instead of 10, reducing the school calendar from 185, the traditional school calendar from 185 to 180 days. So there would be expected a decrease in the salary based on the decreased days of work. So there are some very interesting, to say the least, and I use interesting in a very unfortunate way, ideas being floated out there. So any other questions or comments? Okay, then I would entertain a motion to close the public meeting and reconvene the special meeting.
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Mickelson. Is there a second?
Second,
Second by Mr. Reedy.
second.
Second by Mr. Reedy. Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Yes,
Aye.
ma'am.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the
Aye.
same sign. Okay, then we are now back in the special board meeting. Okay, we'll move to the communications and correspondence. Public comment, not applying to the special meeting. Okay, if a member of the public initiates specific complaints or charges against an employee in order to protect the employee's rights to privacy and due process, the board will only hear those complaints or charges in closed session. The board encourages concerned individuals to file complaints using the appropriate district complaint procedure and appropriate forms, which can be obtained from the district's website. As per policies B, D, D, H, and KD, please limit your comments to the board to one time. Okay, I have a comment from Sharon Sloan, who is a parent. I'm concerned about high school finish times being too late. A lot of students have after-school jobs, and releasing students at 4:30 p.m. would not allow students to get home, change for work, and make it to work on time at 5 p.m. Jobs are important to students, especially students who have jobs and come from lower income families. Please take this into consideration on release times for high school students. Cheryl Notman, SEA President. Good evening, Superintendent McGovern, Chairman Jellicoe, and members of the board. I would like to speak once more to the RIF policy before it is passed. After continued lack of sleep and much research, I have looked into many districts that are in the same place we are across the state. Many, as you know, are also looking into their RIF policies as well. I have found most are in the same place, and I think ours looks good with one piece that I will continue to fight for. I sent you all an email earlier today asking you to look at language that I found in another district that spelled out exactly how they will put their policy into place. I find this important just for the fact of longevity. As we know, this policy has been in place for well over 30 years, I believe before we had to revamp it. I have no idea how many years this will be in place before we will need to revisit again. I find our policy very arbitrary and still at the whim of whoever reads it and whichever administrator wants to choose the criteria in which to determine removal of a teacher. Here is the language I propose we insert so that there is no room for subjectivity. In areas in which there is a surplus of teachers, initial contract teachers will be recommended for termination before continuing contract teachers. If there are no initial contract teachers in an area of surplus, or if there still exists a surplus of continuing contract teachers after terminating all initial contract teachers in the area of surplus, the district administration will attempt to reassign surplus continuing contract teachers to positions in which they have certificate endorsement. The attempted reassignment will be to areas of endorsement where there are vacancies or where there are positions held by initial contract teachers. I appreciate the time the policy committee has put into this policy, and thank you for your consideration in adding this language. Mark Cholak, a staff member. Dear trustees, before you tonight is a proposed new RIF policy. I do not believe this proposed policy is ready for approval at this time for several reasons, which I hope you take into consideration. My first concern is the lack of transparency in the proposed process. It is unclear who will be making the recommendations for which positions will be eliminated. The language says an ad hoc committee may be made up of representatives from human resources, financial management, or appropriate departments. That leaves a broad array of individuals who could have say over which employees are retained and which ones are not. On one hand, teachers have been promised that cost of an individual teacher will not be a consideration, and yet financial management is one of the only departments mentioned in the policy. These two realities are inconsistent. How can you say more expensive teachers are not being targeted and yet make cost one of the major reasons to recommend elimination of positions? Additionally, the specific criteria in the wording leaves a great deal of ambiguity and creates a greatly subjective process. For example, how will the district verify continuing education above and beyond requirements set by PTSB? Many teachers have obtained training not offered by the district and not taken for university credit. It seems as if those training hours will not be included in the total for each teacher. Further, the district has offered certain training opportunities to some employees and not to others. This creates inequality in opportunity to obtain training hours. Several teachers are in the process of obtaining additional degrees, but have not completed them yet. How will those credit hours, be attributed to teachers? The proposed wording states student growth and achievement will be considered,
but not all subjects that are taught are measured on state tests. Not all departments have developed advanced common assessments as of yet because of the staggered nature of the CLI curriculum program. This will be difficult to prove for CTE, fine arts, physical education, and other teachers. Extracurricular will get special consideration under the proposed wording, but not every teacher is certified to coach or to lead these activities. On one hand, there is no need that every teacher hold these certifications because of the limited number of activities that exist. On the other hand, not every teacher desires to be a coach or an activity sponsor. What about teachers who have volunteered or applied to lead such activities, but were not chosen for the job? There is no credit given to the willingness to expand their duties. What is meant by leadership opportunities? Would this include serving on school and district committees? If so, what about those who are unable to take on such opportunities due to situations outside school involving family responsibilities or other concerns? How does the proposed policy define professionalism? There seems to be no objective measure for that. Please consider these and other concerns that have been expressed prior to passing this policy. Mrs. Bolton, would you like to address the first part of this where, because I know we talked about this in the policy meeting, where it talks about the ad hoc committee and why financial management would be included in that group?
Yes, Chair Jellicoe, I'm happy to answer that. The other question I was going to ask you actually was, did you want me to get into some of the other components of that or wait until we bring it up? It's up to you. I can talk about it
Board,
before you vote.
do you have a
or no.
preference?
Maybe address it with 9A.
Okay, just if you would, because of that one comment, I think there's some, or let's just save it for
Okay.
when we talk about the 9B.
I'll mark it right now so I don't forget.
Okay, yeah, let's just save it for that discussion. Okay, and we'll try to get those questions answered at that time. Okay, that does complete the public comment for the special meeting. And so we will now drop to item number 8 on our agenda, in-town schools and desert school start and end times and calendars. 8A, approval of the calendars for all in-town schools and desert school Wamsutter for the 2021-22 and the 2022-23 school years. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, so moved for the recommendation.
Or 8A.
Okay, so you're moving approval of the recommended calendars.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear. Okay, so the calendars for the 2021, 22, and the 2022, 23 calendars. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Jackman. Okay, discussion. Any discussion?
Chair,
Mr. Jackman?
I'm curious on the professional development days. 28 seems like a lot. Do we have a plan for those? I know we have 4 for grade prep. We've got the 4 or 5 that we always have at the beginning of the year. Do we have a general idea of how those are going to look? I know that's been a question.
Doesn't matter, I'm happy to do.
Mrs. Bolton?
Mr. Jackman, so it's essentially 2 professional development days a month. And what we're hoping to accomplish is more planning time, whether that's throughout the week, elementary and secondary will look a little bit different, or towards the end of the day, or those Fridays. But those Fridays really starting to roll out a combination of professional development, time in the classroom, PLC, and student intervention. Mostly being able to intervene with some of the students at the secondary level because we'll be able to build it into the elementary day more. Doesn't mean we can't offer things on Fridays. So what we're going to do is be surveying the staff based off of those to really pin down the needs and wants, but it's going to rotate around those 4 concepts.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mickelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mrs. Bolton, for that clarification. My only reservation at this point with this new calendar is that we will start off with that intent of PLCs and PD, and we will end up having a lot of staff meetings and other activities that don't make the best possible use of that time. And I would be really disappointed if we start off strong and the next thing you know, well, we can't have our PLC that day because we're having a staff meeting to deal with. That would not be honoring the intent. And so I really appreciate that clarity that that is the expectation that those days will be used in that manner. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? I guess I would hope as we get closer, probably this summer, that we might get a more detailed plan. I know we've had the updates monthly and that kind of thing, but I'm hoping that, you know, by July or at the latest, that we start getting some very detailed plans about what those professional development days, those Fridays, are going to look like for the first couple of months or something like that, so that we can share with our constituents that we are satisfied that those days are being used for the purpose they are intended. Okay.
Absolutely. I hope it's before July. I mean, we've
That would
got
be-
the ball
yeah.
rolling, so, and hopefully it's the whole year as a tentative plan with, you know, the idea of the PLCs, especially to get our administrators in there, but if we rotate that through, we'll be able to. There's a lot that's going to go into a 4-day week with the bell-to-bell instruction and, you know, getting rid of the fluff and boiling down to those standards and teaching deep with those. There's that professional development, the meaning professional development that they're going to be doing day to day that we're going to be able to build in. And I know all eyes are going to be on this district. We all know that, but the goal is in the end to increase student achievement. And I really hope we're able to give the teachers what they need moving forward with this. Well, I know we can give them what they need moving forward with this in order for us to increase student achievement. And
So with student achievement being the goal, is there a process developed whereby we will be able to assess that achievement to make sure that we're meeting our goals?
well, there's multiple measures that we'll be able to use, but I am going to ask the board for patience because you usually don't see this in 1 year. It's over a couple years, and the trending data and all the research shows that sometimes after the first year, the results spike and then they might go down a little bit, but they usually don't drop from below where they were before, or they dip a little bit the first year and then they go back up. And I think part of it, when I'm reading the research, is exactly what Mr. Mickelson stated, was that they start off strong and then kind of fall back into old habits. And so that's, I mean, we have to set up those measures. We've got, you know, we're going to be focusing on the data. Of course, there's the state test, and I know every area is not, but you know, we've got graduation rates, we've got student grades and their success rate in passing classes. There's so many measures that we look at now that we need to continue to look at moving forward.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Further discussion?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jackman?
as we get ready to reflect 5 years down the road or whatever, I think this board kind of needs to establish a data point to focus on, because obviously like 2020 is not a good data point to use, or 2021 for establishing that data. So I'm curious what this board would think if they want to go back to 2018, 2019 as our baseline.
Well, and I would
for
suggest
evaluation.
2021 is not a good baseline, neither is 1920 for the same reasons, with classes being gone virtual after March. So it seems like the most recent data that we would have where we would have a complete year is 2018-19.
And it's not for me, it's just establishing that for future boards. You know, if we're looking 5 years down the line, the board could look a lot different in that time. So having that set, does that make sense?
Madam Chair. Superintendent McGovern?
One of the requirements, trustees, that the district has to do, and any district on an alternative calendar, is by July 1st of that year, we're required to submit a report to the Wyoming Department of Education, giving that kind of information. And is the alternative calendar in whatever setup that might be, are they meeting those goals? So I think what you're asking for is actually a requirement that all districts are required to do.
Thank you.
Well, and I think, we talked about the fact that the graduation rates have come out and we've not had a chance to address that. That's the plan for the March meeting, is to address the graduation rates and some of those things. So I will have a more intense discussion, I would imagine, on that coming up at the March meeting. Mr. Mickelson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would add that it is a particularly challenging when looking at baselines because our demographics are shifting with people moving out of the district, with people opting for online schooling because of COVID. So even going back to earlier years, the composition of our student body, we'd have to pay attention to, how similar is it? And it may be a situation where the best we can do is a really kind of inadequate, unequal comparison, and just try to draw the best conclusions from the data that we're getting currently. And so what does that look like? And it is, I don't know if you guys know this, but COVID is really unfortunate and has not made things easier. And this is just another area between COVID and the economy and the changes in our community and state, where trying to do those data comparisons that we were used to it's math above my capacity. That's for certain. So thank you.
Mr. Patolo?
Madam Chair, I agree with the issues that were discussed about finding some type of a point to begin at and to compare to. But what I know for sure is that looking at that is the most important thing, because looking at it makes it change. So whatever we come up with as far as what we're going to look at as the criteria that shows if we're improving or not improving, I think we're going to be successful. I don't know if now is the time to ask about the graduation rate, or should I wait for that, Chairman?
Well, I think, I think my understanding is you wanted to request some information. So when we do have that discussion in March.
Yes, it's going to be consistent with what I've been asking for a long time. The idea of looking at data from 6th and 9th grade, specifically to language arts and to mathematics, along with discipline and attendance. And I think what we're going to find out is the same thing that everybody else has found out in the nation, is that those are very closely correlated. Some studies have said that if you fail math or language arts in 6th or 9th grade, you have a 25% chance of graduating, which would allow us to look at what our 5th and 6th graders are doing to maybe do some interventions, our 8th and 9th graders are doing to do interventions. Again, it's not an opportunity to blame. It's an opportunity to look at data and see if there are things that we can do to help. So I would request that, along with, of course, all the regular demographic data: how many males, how many females, how our minority students are doing, how our special education students are doing, all of those things that I don't remember us looking at that quite as critically as I wish we would. I'd like to make that a formal request if I could. The other thing that I wanted to comment on actually goes back to the 4-day week. And one of the things that I think we're not reminding our community of is the fact that if we go to this, as we go to this 4-day week, we now take away that opportunity or that necessity to take our best teachers out of the classroom to do training. And I think it's important to remind the community of that's one of the compelling things about going to a 4-day week, is that you don't take teachers out of their classrooms. So I guess I'm reminding you of things you already know, but I'd like to remind the people that are listening that that's part of the reason we're doing that too. So anyway, thank you.
Further discussion? Okay, then the motion is to approve the recommended calendars for the 2021-22 and the 2022-23 school years. We have a second and this, or we have the motion and the second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed by the same sign? Motion passes. Okay, 8B, approval of the start and end times for all in-town schools and Desert School, Wamsutter, beginning with the 2021-22 school year. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mickelson,
I would move that we approve the start and end times as outlined under the additional option on page 42 of the presentation.
okay, so the motion is to approve the additional option that was developed at the board's request on page 42 of the presentation. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Summers. Okay, discussion. Mr. Batolo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My only question, and I guess I'm looking at you, Ms. Bolton, because you're the one presenting. In a lot of cases, you gave people an opportunity to vote. Can you support this? And now all of a sudden, we're in a situation where we're getting ready to approve something. I am not against the notion of doing that. I just wonder what maybe it's not fair. If it's not fair, please don't answer.
It's okay.
What's your sense of the committee that put this together? Is there any notion that you have that was a trend that wasn't exactly this, but kind of this? Or I guess I'm just asking you to tell me what you think.
Chair Jellicoe,
Mrs. Bolton.
Mr. Batolo, I think that if we had gone into this not using buses as the driving factor for the schedule, we probably would have come out with something a little more similar to that. Now, that is my opinion. When we sat down, we're still getting feedback on the early start time and the high school going so late. I think that this one honestly was just a combination of all of the feedback, trying to get it to right where most people wanted it and not make such a drastic time after school where elementary kids would be home alone, trying to take all of those concerns into place. And so if this was to go out with all the rest, this is my opinion,
Okay.
but based off of the feedback and stuff, I think that this one would probably be the top pick.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mickelson.
Madam Chair, thank you. Trustee Batolo, I served on the start and end time committee and the calendar committee. And the very strong preference of the start and end time committee was for 8:30, 8:45 start time for the high school and junior high. Because that is better fitting with the research on their performance. And then the adjustment is out of respect for the feedback from the committee or from the community. One of the things that I really appreciated about how that feedback was elicited was the question, could you support any of these? And so I think that, those were overwhelmingly supported, that, yeah, like I can live with any one of these, other than the 157.
Yeah, that was done ago.
Yeah, that was a no, thank you. No one wants that. And so this really represents a solid compromise that respects the research and the needs of the community and the desires of staff. And so I wish that we had had something like this to send out, but we were starting from the committee's preference. And that committee was composed of parents and employees and students and, business people. It was broad for that later secondary start time. And so we had to work from that point. But this is a really, really good method of meeting all those various demands and still assuring that what works best for students is the primary factor, even if it's being strongly influenced by needs in other areas that are needs, right? Thank you.
Further discussion?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jackman?
can we get information next month on how the busing looks if we pass this and? No, okay.
It's too early.
That
Okay.
usually comes out in usually August, July and August, isn't it? That usually the busing.
I do
June.
think sooner than later, we're gonna
Mhm.
be jumping on that, Michelle, and
I'm just
Mm.
thinking if it comes out, it's not possible to do the buses, or it looks, you've got kindergartners riding with seniors in high school. Does that make sense that we could maybe backtrack
Just
a
some
little bit or something
updates.
along those lines? But
Yeah, typically we try to get the routes out as soon as we can so our families can comment on all of those. One thing, trustees, I do know that the policy for walkers and riders will need to be adjusted. So we may need your support on some of the policy revisions for that as we begin that process as well. But I think our next priorities, on the later agendas are going to be the student achievement in March. And then, quite frankly, trustees, it's got to be the budget and the proposed cuts and working through all of those. We've got a lot of staff and families out there that are very interested in knowing, how things are going to go and sharing that information. So truly, I see that would be our next big hurdle for us, knowing these bus routes are very important, but we've got a lot of employees that are interested in knowing what's going to go on here.
And unfortunately, that's the legislature starts meeting next Monday, I believe it is. Even though they've got some committee things going on this week, but the session starts Monday, March 1st.
as soon as we have enough information to be able to do it, we'll jump on that to get the board updated immediately. We just don't have any idea where we're going. It's not a good place to be.
okay, no, I understand.
Further discussion? Hearing none, then the motion is to approve the additional option that was made at the board request. For clarification, that means the elementary start time would be 8:10 a.m. and end time at 3:00 p.m. The junior high would start at 8 a.m. and end at 3:45 p.m. And the high school would start at 8 a.m. and end at 4:15 p.m., just for clarification. Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Bye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same sign? Motion passes. Okay, item number 9 is approval of policy GCPA, the reduction in professional staff workforce. Is there a motion?
Madam,
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Jackman. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Mickelson. Discussion.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Mickelson?
So pre-COVID, the estimate was that we were looking nationally at a teacher shortage somewhere around 200,000 full-time positions. The indications post-COVID are that teacher shortage will at least double. And I am less worried about the specifics of this policy than I am about what education in Wyoming will look like going forward. As districts, because of, and this is just my opinion as a private citizen, not a board member, as the legislative body does not take steps to increase revenues because they are unpopular and it makes it very difficult to get reelected, which ultimately is none of our job. None of us who are in elected positions are here to be elected again. You are here to do the right thing. And if districts in our state are put in a position where they have to RIF people, getting people to come to Wyoming to teach is hard under the best of circumstances. And if districts across the state are forced into a position where they have to RIF, it will be decades before we undo that damage and we are able to recruit the best and brightest teachers for our students. And I very dearly hope that the people in Cheyenne who are making those decisions recognize that we, by statute, have to educate the kids on all of the areas of the basket of goods, including areas where we already are provided no funding. We are assessed, we are judged, our accreditation is based on meeting and teaching the kids those things. We can't do that without teachers. We can't do that without administrators. We can't do that without bus drivers and food service and all of the people that are needed to make sure those kids are educated. And so I find it very distasteful that we're even having to discuss riffing because of the implications for our state and for our kids for the next 50 years. And I really hope they are listening and that they are paying attention to the impact of their choices outside of, I can go back to my local community and say, by golly, I didn't raise taxes. But having said that, Madam Chair, as an aside, my only real concern with this current policy is that it illuminated the anxiety and the lack of good faith that exists between the board and our educational staff. And regardless if we have to use this policy or not, I think we as a board have a lot of work to do to build their confidence and their trust that if a process like riffing occurs, or if there's a transfer because there's a need for a certification in a different area, that those are good and open decisions that were made in the best interest of schools and students, and that this is a district where our priority is educating kids and taking care of our employees. And that's all I've got there. Thank you.
Other comments? Mr. Patolo.
Thank you, Mr. Mickelson, for those words. I agree with the notion that I kind of shake my head and wonder how we got here. As a child of plenty, I look around and I see people my age that didn't have to think about any of this, that had to just, you got up in the morning and you got on the orange and black Tiger bus. You've heard me say before, the first time I rode on a yellow school bus was when I student taught, because I walked to school and I never rode on a yellow school bus on an event. So maybe we've been jaded and maybe we fell asleep. So I would implore people to do all they can to affect those that make the rules and those that are voting. I struggle with this policy for a couple of reasons. One is even as staunchly supportive of athletics as I am, we have on here extracurricular and co-curricular also. That's one of the criteria, but tenure is not. And whether we call it tenure or continuing status, as I read this, it says may. Factors in no particular order that may be considered related to individual employees include but are not limited to. And then as I read that, the next thing it talks about is areas of licensure. I can't support something that doesn't have a may for tenure. So my other concern, as the notion that I may be in the minority in this particular vote, the definition of achievement, the definition of professionalism, I'm very concerned about that. This has not been something that I've experienced before, that you would be rated on something that's that kind of dependent upon relationships. So I appreciate how difficult this is. I appreciate that for those that will eventually have to make a list where some names are crossed through. I know how difficult that is. And I have experienced the whole notion personally of being a non-tenured teacher and being told that we were all non-renewed on a given day. I don't think that's fair either. So I guess what I'm saying is I understand, but I don't choose to support anything that doesn't quantify those three areas.
Having been on the policy committee myself, I struggled with this policy, as anyone that was on the policy committee knows. I have heard multiple people say exactly what you said about, in Wyoming, it's called continuing contract. We do not have a tenure law. I would have people look at the last two bullets where it talks about professional teaching experience at accredited institutions, which includes, since we are accredited, that means this district, as well as years of certified service in the district. So it may not say seniority, but that's what those two items are designed to reflect. It is a may, so that those items, the previous policy was based totally on seniority. And we have been told by legal counsel that Wyoming law does not provide that. So that was the reason for the revision of this particular policy. The professionalism, as I understand it, there is a code of professional conduct by PTSB. So that's where that definition comes from. So that might be some clarifications, and I know you were not on the policy committee, so that those are designed for clarification for us as well as our staff and where we came from. This has not been an easy policy to determine, and as I have said multiple times, I hope all this work has gone into this policy and we don't have to use it. As we look around the country, we know that actually there's going to be an increase in the need of teaching positions because of smaller classes, and some of that may be helped along with some additional federal funds that we can only hope for. But I have to agree with Mr. Mickelson. If we have to end up riffing people, it will drastically damage public education in the state of Wyoming for decades. Because once these people go, they will not come back. And the reputation will be, don't go to Wyoming because you don't have a secure job there. They don't invest in education. And that is very difficult for me, having been a lifelong educator, to say about the state of Wyoming. I came from Utah with 2 years of experience there and came here in the early 70s and basically thought I died and gone to heaven with how well education was funded then and has continued to be funded. The cuts that are potentially coming will devastate public education in the state of Wyoming. It doesn't really make any difference what district. All districts will be found in that position. So those are just some things that that we're going to be dealing with. And like I said, I hope this policy does not have to be implemented because it will not be a good thing for anybody. A RIF is a lose-lose. There are no winners in a RIF. The district doesn't win, teachers don't win, the public does not win, students do not win. So,
Chair Jellicoe,
further comment. Mrs. Bolton?
would you like me to clarify?
Yes,
some
if
of
you would
this?
address those questions, please.
So first off, I agree with everything you guys have said, and I hope the public is hearing our plea to please look at those bills. We have a lot of elected officials saying things that are not true. they're not even the facts of what they're misinformed. And I don't think they're even intentionally doing it, but they're misinformed. What is about to happen to education if these cuts come will decimate education as we know it in Wyoming. I mean, really just cutting all funding to all sports and activities, cutting funding so bad that we might have, we get cut so bad that we have to close every elementary school in order to meet that cut. So please, I mean, we're begging, hear our plea. And with that, this is how this did come up, because we could see the writing on the wall of exactly what was going to happen. And it was advised to, I was misquoted saying that the state advised us to do that. That is not what happened. The Wyoming School Boards Association was advised to bring forward their RIF policies if they were very outdated, ours 25 years, and were solely based off seniority. Well, ours was. So we brought it forth. And this has not that I'm ever popular in this position anyways, but it's heightened my popularity even that much more. So let me explain. The ad hoc committee. First off, Mr. Duncan will be a part of those conversations when we are talking about overall positions in a district. And so when you're looking at the in dollar amount and positions needed and numbers in a classroom, numbers of teachers, those things, Scott is a critical part in informing Kelly of exactly where we're at financially, how many positions we can hold, et cetera, et cetera. Then the next committee does not hold the chief financial officer. It actually holds the human resource director and the superintendent, and then you bring in the parties that are, I guess, privileged, and the information's needed from them to start making decisions. And that would be department directors, that would be the principals at that point, and those are the personnel confidential conversations that had previously, it had been, requested just to see if SEA could potentially be, and they can't, because those are the personnel conversations that occur. The law is very clear. We can't make decisions based off discrimination, and we need to make decisions based in the best interest of the district. Obviously, in 25 years, lawsuits and the law has changed at how they look at things. And I think that one of the things when we're looking in here is, even if we choose to pick one group, it can cause discrimination suits with the other group. And so what we looked at was, what are some criteria that make up what is a good teacher? Because in the end, our job is to do what's best for kids and make decisions for what's best for kids. And I pray we don't have to do a RIF, because it's a no-win situation and nobody wants to do it. But if we do, our sole job is to make sure that we're keeping the best person in the classroom. These are in alphabetical order on purpose, so that one wasn't more important than the other. But as Chair Jellicoe pointed out, the bottom two, we did include professional teaching experience at accredited institutes and years of certified service in a district. The reality is, when you take a policy away from just seniority, it's going to become subjective. And even when we tried to look at rubrics, it just became more subjective. Because you're right, it is subjective criteria. But in the end, doing what's right is not easy. And what I ask the board is this: I've heard the comments that Nicole is going after continuing contract teachers. Nicole only wants to keep first-year teachers. I've heard all of those comments. What I ask is, when you look at this policy is basically asking you to take out that name of a continuing contract or initial contract and look at the different qualities of the person so that we can keep the best person in the classroom. So all I've asked when people have said, we need seniority in there, you need to get rid of all initial contract teachers first. All I've simply asked is why. Explain to me why that's the right thing to do. And I get, because. we've earned it. That's just something we get. Well, that's not what's in the best interest of kids. And I agree with what Mr. Mickelson says. You know, it's always thrown out there as, well, they're going to target, they're going to do this. But the reality is there's a checks and balance. Even when some references have been made to past leaders, there was still a checks and balance. And you're right, we're going out on a limb, asking people to have some faith and trust in us that we will make the right decision. But I publicly pushed back, and I will still publicly push back, that seniority alone should be a deciding factor, or that there should be a statement in there that we just get rid of all initial contract teachers first, because in the end, I question why. Why is that the right thing to do for kids? Is that going to keep the best person in the classroom? And the committee worked on these different areas. You're right, they're gonna be subjective, but we do have criteria that define professionalism. We've got GBH, and we've also got the PTSB Code of Conduct. You know, extracurricular and co-curriculars in there, along with leadership responsibilities. That encompasses a huge area, and it's so that we can look at every person as a whole person and keep the best person in the classroom. And I can speak of that as a parent too. So, you know, if we put something in a policy that says we're just going to get rid of all initial contract teachers first before we look at continuing contract teachers, I think that we've defeated the point of this policy of setting it up so that we can look at the person as a whole and make decisions to ensure that we're keeping the best person in the classroom. Are there any other questions clarifying those?
Further questions or comments? Mr. Mickelson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've given a lot of thought to this policy, and I try to run some scenarios through my head, right? So my wife's been teaching for 20 years. She's a very good teacher. And let's say that under some like horrible circumstance, we're forced to move to Jackson. It's pretty there, but nobody can afford that. And she's been teaching for 2 years at a middle school in Jackson, and they have to riff. And here you have a highly qualified, very good teacher who shows exceptional growth in her students, who would, under our old policy, be let go because there's no flexibility to address all those other areas that make an outstanding teacher. And I am sensitive to and understand the stress and fear around it. But if we should be in a place, any district should be in a place where they're having to do a RIF, having the ability to keep those very, very strong teachers that you're going to need because you're going to have 40 kids in a classroom is really critical. And so as much as I appreciate and understand the concern and wish there was some language that could be inserted that would assuage that anxiety, you're talking about people's jobs. I don't think, you know, especially with the number of schools that we're looking at closing, I'm not sure that being a teacher in this district for 15 years will be a protection if we have to close that many schools, right? Like that sense of security because of longevity is false. And it is better for our teachers to have a policy that allows more than how many years have you worked for Sweetwater One to be considered. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other comments? Mr. Batolo?
Thank you for all the conversation around this issue. I don't want to be misunderstood. I support the notion that there are great first and second and third year teachers. I am not in any way saying that we should riff all of them first. My only concern was that it just doesn't feel like this goes far enough. That's all. I you know, again, I'm gonna say it the best way I know how. We're gonna vote tonight, and when we finish, I'm gonna do everything I can to help us do whatever we choose to do the best way we can. I just, maybe it's the part of me that's rebelling against the fact that we have to make this policy. And I don't know what kind of human that makes me be, but that's how I feel. I just feel like to say just a little bit more for me. So I just wanted those of you that don't know me to know that's what I mean. I don't mean that we need to go to the other end and say, if you've been here for 20 years, you're bulletproof, because that absolutely is not true. I don't believe that. But I do respect the fact that those teachers receive tenure, and I hope that they are continuing status. I'm sorry, I keep on that wrong term. I believe that those administrators that gave them that status did a great job to get them there. I also know that as careers wane, so does enthusiasm sometimes, but it doesn't always. So I guess I'm just justifying what I'm about to do, and I'm sorry for that.
I would like to share too that there was much discussion about the areas of I'm trying to see what we call them, the areas of consideration. And those were decided upon because it was felt that those are the areas that technically a teacher with a history of being in the district, those are areas that they should excel in because of the opportunities that have been given in the district. Whether it's coaching assignments, whether it's a leadership position, whether it's an educational degree level, those were all decided upon because those are the things that make up a good teacher. And hopefully the years of experience that a person has in the district or in any district for that matter helps them become our best teachers. So that's how those areas of criteria were developed. And hopefully it will identify those people that those years of experience have helped to make those good teachers, and that we won't have to do it's mind-boggling to me that we might have to ultimately get rid of good people. And that's what happens. That's potentially what happens in a RIF. Is you have to reduce the staff, and that means technically we're going to have to, hopefully, if we're able to ward off some of the economic factors, financial factors, but if we can't, that's what's going to happen, is there will be good teachers that may have to be RIFed. And that breaks my heart. That just absolutely breaks my heart. Mrs. Bolton?
Can I make one more point of clarification with this?
Certainly.
I think that what people are striving for in this uncomfort, and I don't want to sound insensitive to the uncomfort, this is not good. It's not even good that we may have to look at this. But I think what they're striving for is some checklist that they could check off to show that they're the better teacher. And here's the reality. It's not about jumping in at the 10th hour and putting on a dog and pony show. People need to understand, our administrators know who's been a good teacher. The teacher that has the good relationships with the kids. That teacher that reaches out and knows their students. That teacher that really implements strong lessons and those kids are excelling and showing growth. It doesn't have to be a state assessment. You can walk into CTE rooms and those administrators see the kids that are excelling and taking on more independence and their projects are that much higher. So this isn't going to be a checklist. And again, it's to get to that well-rounded person. But I know in the sheer panic and the uncomfort of stuff, people want a checklist to say, I'm the better teacher. But the reality is, what have you been doing from day one? Whether it's been this year or whether it's been the last 20 years. Because nobody's going to be looking at a dog and pony show that's put on in the last minute to try to meet all of this. That's not what it's about. Just because someone doesn't coach and just because someone doesn't have a master's degree doesn't mean that they're not phenomenal in the classroom and that we've seen huge student achievement and those kids can't wait to come to school every single day. I don't want to get rid of someone like that. We're not going to have a checklist, and it is going to be open because you've got to get to the well-rounded person of who's going to be best in the classroom.
Further discussion.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jackman?
a couple quick questions. I think there's a lot of data out there that if you've been a teacher for 10 or 12 years, you're generally a better teacher than a first-year teacher. And I think that's a way of protecting our tenured staff or continuing contract staff as a whole. On that point 3, I think John brought it up a little bit. It says reviewing staff for any reduction in force, yada, yada, yada. Factors in no particular order that may be considered. And I was curious, because shall was in there at one point. I was curious why shall and may were switched.
Chair Jellicoe?
Mrs. Bolton?
Shall almost makes it a checklist. So then it's going to go through and every single one of those criteria are going to be considered for every single person. And that might take away from someone that hasn't gotten the master's degree, but is the good teacher. And when you put may, you can encompass all of those, or if one's not relevant, it's not the heavy factor. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And then my other thing is, we've talked about a couple times about the professionalism and everything else. I think it would make people more comfortable if we said professionalism as defined by policy GDH or as defined by the PTSB included. Does that make sense? But it's up to you guys, whatever you think. I don't know if you've considered that or not.
The reason that we didn't put specifics in like that is sometimes those specifics change. And so then when those specifics change, then you have to change the policy. Whereas professionalism is, PTSB has a code of professionalism, as does our policy. And so that's where it would be addressed. And so that would be the reference point, even though it's not in the policy.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mrs. Summers, did you have something?
I just want some clarification. Is there, and I know there have maybe been some discussions about it, is there a reason why initial contract is not expressly, addressed in this policy versus continuing contract?
By law, okay, initial contract means that if they are not renewed, you don't have to give a reason. Whereas continuing contract, you would have to give a reason except with a RIF policy. That's the exclusion. But any other time that a teacher is not renewed, if they're in their first 3 years and have not been given continuing contract status, then the district does not have to give a reason for them not being renewed. And that's the big difference between continuing contract and initial contract.
So that's why it's not listed somewhere expressly in this policy then?
Yeah, RIF policies only apply to continuing contract for that reason. So that's why it doesn't regard to initial.
And I guess, I was just wanting to address, the question in the public comment about the initial contract and make sure that, there was a reason for why, some of those things weren't addressed in this policy, as I guess a point of clarification so that it was understood why we didn't, or why the policy committee didn't include that.
Well, those kind of statements can be included. The reason why the policy committee didn't include that is because, again, you're going back to just saying, well, because you've only been here 1, 2, or 3 years, then you're automatically gone, whether you're the best person for the classroom or not. And one would like to assume that, being here longer makes the better teacher. And I think for the majority it does. There's always going to be those exceptions.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Hearing none, then all in favor of approving of policy GCPA, say aye, please.
Aye.
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 Opposed by the same sign?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, item number 10 is personnel approval to accept the letter of resignation from Carrie Sturgeon. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Jackman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Summers. And I would say, add that that's effective at the end of the 2020-2021 school year. So all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed by the same sign. Motion passes.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mickelson,
may I
I'm sorry.
please have it noted that I abstain?
Okay. Thank you. We have an abstention. Thank you. Okay, item number 11, board information, policy GCPA-R, the reduction in professional staff workforce definitions. 11B, policy GCPA-R-2, reduction in force, the RIF recall procedure. And 11C, policy GCPA-E, the recall request form. Those are there for board information. Before we adjourn, I would like to advise folks that, as I said earlier, legislative committees are working, I think, for tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday for some committees. I know Senate Education is meeting Wednesday at 8:30 virtually, and the House Education Committee is meeting at 8 o'clock Thursday virtually. And those sessions can be followed on the legislative website. The legislature starts its session next Monday. And I believe we have some forums that will be scheduled. On the 2nd, I think, is an evening forum for all, hopefully, community people as well as staff, at kind of what we're up against and what you as a citizen of Wyoming and of this district can do. We also have a morning meeting on
On the 4th.
the 4th. So there's an evening meeting on the 2nd and a morning meeting on March 4th. So hopefully there will be some people that will be interested and take on the idea of visiting with legislators, local as well as statewide, and have their focus on education, actually share with people their focus on education and their thoughts about funding education. That being said, anyone else have any comments? Okay, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Jackman. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.